The Odyssey marks the beginning of the end, the beginning of the downfall of Christopher Nolan. Now, I'm not saying that Christopher Nolan's career is over. No, that's not happening. Christopher Nolan will continue to make movies. He will continue to have fans of those movies. What I'm saying is the perception of Christopher Nolan is forever changed.
Architectural Outcast.
For a long time, Christopher Nolan was seen as one of the few directors left in Hollywood who was outside of politics, who made movies for the love of making movies, not as a platform for a message. For whatever reason, Christopher Nolan decided to use the Odyssey to take a side, to make an ideological statement. Taking a side isn't the problem. It's how he went about taking the side that's the problem. He chose to come down off of his pedestal and dive headfirst into the mud. When you start wallowing around in the mud, you shouldn't be surprised if you find yourself covered in mud. Christopher Nolan has gone out of his way to let everyone know that he wrote his adaptation of the Odyssey. He's not some director for hire brought in to bring somebody else's vision to life. Oh no, he's responsible for every design decision in the Odyssey. The Odyssey is going to sink or swim based upon Nolan's choices, based upon what Nolan has to say about the Odyssey. Early on in this Odyssey, see what I did there? There were red flags that Nolan had gone ideological. Zendaya was cast as Athena, a goddess known for her otherworldly beauty. Lupita Nyong'o was cast as Helen of Troy, the most beautiful woman in the world, the face that launched 1,000 ships. And it was rumored that Elliot Page was going to portray Achilles, arguably one of the most formidable warriors of the ancient world. Whew. We were quickly told, yep, Zendaya is Athena, Lupita is Helen. And if you have a problem with that, you're a naughty person. But no. Elliot Page is not going to be Achilles. Yes, Elliot is going to portray a Greek soldier, but that soldier is definitely not Achilles. That's a lie being spread by naughty people for naughty reasons. We were constantly being told Christopher Nolan doesn't care about the criticism of his design choices because no one knows what his design choices are because the movie's not out yet. All the noise online is from people who haven't seen the movie yet. The only valid criticism comes from people who've seen the movie. So all you naughty people need to shut up. Well, tell them, animal. The movie's out. And we now know what's in it. And guess what? Zendaya is Athena, Lupita is Helen, and Elliot Page is definitely not Achilles. Elliot is portraying Sinon, who replaces Achilles and serves the same function as Achilles in the story. Every design decision is a conscious choice. It's meant to be that way. Ever since the first leaks, people of all stripes have been up in arms over some of Nolan's design choices. Now, personally, I'm not overly concerned with what design choices that Nolan made. I'm interested in why he made those design choices. What is he trying to tell us? What is he saying about the Odyssey? Let's set aside Elliot Page's history, personal situation with its associated politics on all sides, and just examine who Elliot Page is as a physical being, their stature, their physical appearance, their presence, their aura. So let me get this straight. Nolan removes Achilles from the story to replace him with Sinon, who's not even in the Odyssey. They're from a completely different story. And then he insists the best person possible to portray Sinon is Elliot Page. And then he has Odysseus tell us Sinon is the greatest soldier he'd ever seen. Meanwhile, Elliot Page looks like a prepubescent boy. Is Christopher Nolan trying to tell us he advocates for children's soldiers? I don't think so. Now let's back up a moment. Somebody being small of stature, slight of build, isn't a problem in of itself. I mean, historically, the hoplites, depending on the source, were on average somewhere between 5'5" and 5'7". Today, the American military, their most elite units, SEALs, Delta, Rangers, they're on average 5'10", 180 pounds. Let's use a famous example. A man who, depending on the source, was somewhere around 5'5" and $130 on a good day, and pretty much to the day he died, had a sweet baby face, but yet was arguably one of the most deadly soldiers America ever produced, Audie Murphy. There is a story about a young and up-and-coming actor, handsome, tall, 6'2", 200 pounds, who was the flavor of the moment, and his press started to go to his head. He started throwing his weight around town, but apparently he was also a pretty mean drunk. The flavor of the month got drunk at a Hollywood soiree and started bullying a much smaller man, slapping him around. Audie stood up and said, "Stop." The drunk decided the diminutive baby-faced Audie would make the perfect next victim. What happened next happened so fast that most people missed it. But what they did see was the drunk, the much larger man, laying on the floor, incapable of bullying anyone. One thing the eyewitnesses all agreed on is that when Audie stood up, everybody in the room, except the drunk bully, smelled the fear, felt the menace radiating off Audie. The man who had done all those things in the war was now standing in front of them. And regardless of size, in that moment, Audie was the most dangerous man in the room. And that danger carried over to the screen. When Audie stood up to the baddie, audiences believed. Audie Murphy is a classic example of an American archetype. The small, quiet, soft-spoken, gentle man who you do not cross under any circumstance. James Cagney and Alan Ladd made entire careers portraying this archetype. One of the subplots of Shane is the diminutive lad versus the towering, hulking Jack Palance. No one believes that Elliot Page is dangerous. More importantly for this context, no one believes that Elliot Page is capable of portraying a dangerous person. There's a reason why all those memes exist. And no one believes that somebody would say with a straight face, "They're the greatest soldier I've ever seen," about somebody being portrayed by Elliot Page. Christopher Nolan is demanding the audience believe a lie. Now we're getting to the heart of the matter. Why does Christopher Nolan demand the audience accept a lie? We come back to that old word, deconstruction, to destroy. You all see, the Iliad and Odyssey have long been the holy grail of the deconstruction crowd. Why? Because they're part of the foundation of Western culture. They help define Western art, literature, philosophy, beauty, and in this context, Western concepts of femininity and masculinity. The thinking of the deconstructionists is that if they can destroy the Iliad and Odyssey, they can delegitimize large sections of Western culture. The Iliad and Odyssey are part of the foundation of our modern masculine concepts of honor, integrity, loyalty, self-sacrifice, self-control, self-discipline, and that we should live up to these ideals even if we find ourselves in a situation where we know we're going to lose, even if those in positions of power abuse those ideals, because those ideals are worth pursuing regardless of the circumstance. By casting Elliot Page, someone incapable of portraying those ideals, as someone who Odysseus says is the greatest soldier they ever saw, thus the greatest example of those ideals, Christopher Nolan is mocking, ridiculing, and condemning those ideals. We saw this open contempt for traditional Western femininity and masculinity reflected in the interviews of Elliot Page and Samantha Morton leading up to the release of the Odyssey. Page was carrying on about the outdated patriarchy, cisgendered heteronormative oppression, and Morton claimed that women throughout time have been persecuted. Midwives, healers, herbalists, women in touch with the moon were all condemned. Most people reacted with confusion and then derision, because it highlighted that unless you're in a bubble with a bunch of people with shared assumptions, what came out of these two people's mouths were word salads, words linked together that have no connection to one another. However, if you do know the shared assumptions, you will quickly recognize that both people were spouting deconstructionist rhetoric that goes back to the 60s, the 1960s, that is. Peace, love, and burn the West to the ground. Both Page and Morton are parroting the old social construction of reality argument. The theory is that it's always the loudest voice in the room that gets to determine reality. And in the past, it was naughty people, that nasty old patriarchy, that imposed an oppressive and tyrannical reality on society. So it's time to destroy that old reality, replace it with a new reality, a modern reality for a modern audience. There's something I've noticed, a common theme among the people who've seen the movie. Not the shills, but everybody else. Even those who are saying, Lupita as Helen, she was only in it for a couple minutes. It wasn't a big deal. It didn't take me out of the movie. And Page as Sinon, didn't work for me, but again, it was fine, no big deal. They have a problem. They can't articulate it, but something is bothering them. It all goes back to the Odyssey being a part of the foundation of Western civilization. The values that we find in the Odyssey are the moral, ethical, and philosophical roots of modern Western values. The same values that most people who are raised in Western culture have internalized. They see them as their own values. So when they encounter something like the Odyssey with its open hatred and contempt of those same values, they don't see it as an abstract attack on some obscure work of literature. They see it as a direct personal attack. Nolan has stepped in it. What's more, Nolan, or whoever was advising him, knew the audience would take the deconstruction, the open hostility and hate as a personal attack. Because every time they've tried it in the past, the audience rejected it. The deconstructionists, though, they aren't interested in making money. Now, don't get me wrong, Nolan wants to make money. He likes his lifestyle, his power, and his influence. But the deconstructionists, what they want to accomplish is to change reality itself. They want to destroy the Odyssey, replace it with their version of the Odyssey, destroy the values that are found in the Odyssey, and replace them with their values. The hypocrisy of the ideologues, the diversity and inclusion crowd, the deconstructionists have been on display for everyone to see. But again, these people don't care if they're hypocrites. They've been using sophistry, lies, manipulations, deceit since the 60s. Because their goal isn't to tell the truth or to offer an honest critique. It's to destroy Western civilization and to replace it with their own reality. Ends justify the means, baby. What people often forget is that while hypocrisy can work in the short term, it is not a long-term viable strategy. Part of the reason is because those of us raised in the West have no use for hypocrisy. We think it's vile. And when we encounter it being brazenly flaunted in our faces, we recoil in horror and disgust. It's part of the reason why Hollywood is going bankrupt. Here's where things get evil. In their attempt to fool people, prevent them from realizing they want to destroy Western civilization, the deconstructionists, and now Christopher Nolan, deploy human shields. They want to destroy traditional beauty, so they race swap. They cast Lupita Nyong'o as Helen of Troy. They want to destroy traditional masculinity and femininity, so they go androgynous, cast Elliot Page as the Achilles stand-in. 20 years ago, this tactic used to work. People wouldn't want to be seen as attacking the weak and vulnerable, and so they'd back off whenever the human shield was trotted out. Nowadays, people see through it. They realize what's what, and they don't care anymore. What's more, they see the people who engage in these tactics, who use human shields, who use the weak and vulnerable to hide and push their agendas. They find those people as vile and contemptible. And then along comes Christopher Nolan, shouting, "Hold my Bud Light," as he dives headfirst into the same crap, using the same failed tactics that Hollywood has been using for the last 10 to 15 years to push their ideological deconstructionist slop, and then using the same tactics in an effort to shut up anybody who calls them out on their ideological deconstructionist slop. Nolan's going to carry this stench for a long time. When you roll around in the mud, you shouldn't be surprised if you find yourself covered in mud. Nolan chose a side, and then he chose to play dirty. It's not a question of if he's going to fall. The question is, how far is he going to fall? At any rate, I hope it gave you all something to think about, and until next time, y'all be safe.
Please like and subscribe. Please leave a comment.